Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we uncover heartfelt tales that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and redemption. Today's story is about a chance encounter that leads to uncovering a long-buried family secret, a journey to justice, and the healing bonds of family. Let's begin. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Maplewood, a quiet suburban town where the streets were lined with golden leaves and memories seemed to linger in the air. Officer Ethan Carter, a seasoned policeman in his mid-40s, drove his patrol car down Preston Avenue, his thoughts heavy. The anniversary of his son Caleb's death always cast a shadow over him, and today marked 5 long years since the accident. The loss had left an ache in his heart that no amount of time or routine could heal. Caleb had been his pride, his joy, a bright spark in Ethan's otherwise structured life. Now, Ethan carried his memory like a weight, a burden he both cherished and mourned. As he rounded a corner, a sudden movement caught his eye. A teenage boy, no older than 16, darted across the street without glancing at oncoming traffic. Instinctively, Ethan flicked on his lights and pulled over. He wasn't looking to write a ticket. This was more about habit than enforcement. Stepping out of the car, Ethan called out, "Hey there, mind if we talk for a minute?" The boy froze mid-step, his scruffy brown hair tousled by the breeze. He turned, revealing a face that made Ethan's breath hitch. The resemblance was uncanny: sharp hazel eyes, a slightly crooked nose, and that same awkward slouch Caleb had when he was younger. It was as if time had rewound and delivered a ghost from Ethan's past. "Name's Officer Carter," Ethan said, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "What's your name?" "Kid. Logan," the boy mumbled, barely meeting Ethan's gaze. Logan Reed. The name didn't register, but the familiarity in Logan's features left Ethan shaken. He forced himself to focus, to treat this like any other encounter. "You know jaywalking's dangerous, right?" Ethan asked, his tone gentle. Logan nodded and fidgeted with the chain around his neck. That's when Ethan noticed it, a silver pendant, small but distinct, hanging from the boy's necklace. It was identical to the one he had given Caleb years ago. The same intricate Celtic knot design, one of a matching set Ethan had bought on a father-son trip to Ireland. Caleb's necklace had been buried with him. "That's an interesting piece," Ethan said, his voice faltering. "Where'd you get it?" Logan's hand flew to the pendant as if protecting it. "It's mine," he replied defensively, taking a step back. "I've had it for years." "Right," Ethan murmured, swallowing the lump forming in his throat. He nodded, letting the conversation end without further pressure. "Be more careful next time." "Okay." Logan nodded again, his eyes wary, and quickly walked away. Ethan stood frozen, watching the boy disappear down the street. The pendant, the resemblance, it was too much to dismiss as coincidence. As he got back into his patrol car, Ethan felt a storm of emotions rising within him. For the rest of his shift, Ethan couldn't focus. Back at the station, he pulled open the drawer where he kept Caleb's photo. It was a school portrait, Caleb smiling brightly, the silver pendant gleaming against his shirt. The image of Logan's face and the necklace wouldn't leave his mind. There had to be an explanation, something logical. Or perhaps, he thought, it was grief playing tricks on him, but Ethan's gut told him otherwise. Caleb's death had left questions, gaps in his life that he'd been too afraid to face. Now, those questions seemed to resurface, demanding answers. The next day, Ethan clocked out early and returned to the area where he'd seen Logan. The streets were quieter now, the hum of suburban life muted in the late afternoon. He scanned the sidewalks until he spotted movement near the back of a hardware store. Logan was there, rummaging through a dumpster. Ethan approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Logan," he called softly. The boy jumped, his eyes wide with recognition. "I wasn't doing anything," Logan blurted out, taking a defensive stance. Ethan raised his hands, palms open. "Relax. I'm not here to give you trouble." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to talk about the necklace." Logan's hand instinctively went to the pendant. "Why do you care?" "Because it looks exactly like one I gave my son." Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The same one he wore the day he died. Logan's face shifted, a mix of confusion and unease. I don't know anything about that, he stammered. Some woman gave it to me years ago. Said it would bring me luck. Who? Ethan pressed gently. I don't remember her name. Logan replied, retreating a step. She worked at a shelter. That's all I know. Ethan studied the boy, noting his hollow cheeks and the weariness in his eyes. When's the last time you had a real meal? He asked, changing the subject. Logan shrugged, his defiance softening. I get by. There's a diner around the corner. Ethan said, my treat, no strings attached. Logan hesitated but eventually nodded. Fine, but I'm ordering whatever I want. At the diner, Ethan watched as Logan devoured a cheeseburger and fries. Try not to wolf it down too quickly. Every mannerism, how Logan pushed his hair back or tapped his fingers on the table, reminded Ethan of Caleb. It was like watching a ghost come to life. But this ghost had a story, one Ethan was determined to uncover. As they parted ways that evening, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Logan wasn't a coincidence. It was a thread, fragile but significant, pulling him toward answers he hadn't dared to seek. The days following Ethan's encounter with Logan were restless. He couldn't let go of the striking similarities. The necklace, and the way Logan had looked at him, equal parts guarded and vulnerable. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a deep, unshakable pull. Somewhere in this boy's past was a connection to the son Ethan had lost, and he couldn't stop until he found the answers. Ethan's search began at the shelter Logan had mentioned. After some digging and a few calls, he tracked down a woman named Ethel Green, a retired volunteer who had spent decades working with vulnerable kids. Her modest home on the outskirts of town was nestled behind a garden of overgrown flowers, the kind of place that held stories within its walls. When Ethel opened the door, she regarded Ethan with sharp, intelligent eyes. Officer Carter, you say? What can I do for you? Ethan held up a photo of Logan. I'm trying to help this boy. He said someone at your shelter gave him a necklace years ago. It's important to me. Ethel's face softened as she invited him in. Ah, Logan. I remember him. He was just a little thing when he first came to us. Quiet, kept to himself. But there was a spark in him, a resilience. Ethan leaned forward. Do you know where he came from? Anything about his family? It's of sight. Her gaze distant. It was after a fire. I think. A tragedy at a foster home upstate. Logan was just a baby when he was pulled from the wreckage. He didn't have anyone, so he ended up bouncing between shelters and group homes. And the necklace? Ethan pressed, his heart racing. Ethel nodded. It was his only possession when I found him. Well, that and a threadbare blanket. I always thought it was odd, a piece like that on a baby, but I figured it was from his birth family. I told him to keep it, said it might bring him luck one day. The room seemed to spin as Ethan processed her words. You're saying he had the necklace when you found him? It wasn't something you gave him? That's right, Ethel said. It was around his neck, as if someone wanted him to hold on to it. Ethan's mind reeled. The necklace wasn't a coincidence. It was part of something much larger, a story that had been hidden for years. Back at home, Ethan pulled out a dusty box from his attic, the one holding Caleb's belongings. He spread its contents across the living room floor, a baseball glove, family photos, and at the very bottom, Caleb's birth records. As he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye, a hospital bracelet marked Baby A. Ethan stared at it, his pulse quickening. Why would Caleb's bracelet say Baby A? He had been an only child, hadn't he? A sinking feeling settled in his chest as he realized what this could mean. What if there had been another baby? A twin? The next morning, Ethan visited St. Luke's Medical Center, where Caleb had been born, navigating the labyrinth of hospital bureaucracy. He finally found himself speaking with an elderly nurse named Helen Davis, who had worked in the maternity ward for decades. Twins, Helen repeated, her brow furrowing as she scanned the old records. Yes, I remember now. Your wife had complications during delivery. There were 2 babies, but she hesitated, lowering her voice. One was declared stillborn. Ethan's heart dropped. Stillborn, he echoed. Are you sure? Helen nodded grimly. That's what the records say. Baby B didn't survive. But something in her expression gave Ethan pause. You're not telling me everything, are you? He didn't sigh, glancing around as if the walls themselves could hear. There were rumors back then about the hospital administration, about adoption agencies paying off staff to separate twins, mark one as stillborn so they could place the child elsewhere for a profit. It wasn't widespread, but it happened. Ethan's jaw clenched. Are you saying my son was taken? I can't say for certain, Helen admitted. But if you suspect something, I'd start with the Hope Foundation. They were deeply involved with this hospital during those years. Armed with this new lead, Ethan reached out to a private investigator, Frank Collins, a retired detective who had a reputation for digging up the truth. Together, they combed through hospital records, adoption files, and financial documents. Slowly but surely, a picture began to form. The Hope Foundation had indeed been involved in a number of questionable adoptions during the time of Caleb's birth. Their records showed a series of payments tied to a Dr. Robert Dawson, the hospital's administrator at the time. Dawson had overseen multiple cases where twins were separated at birth, their files falsified to show one twin as stillborn. Frank leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It's a textbook case of greed, he said. Twins fetch a higher price in the adoption market, especially if they're split up and placed with different families. Fewer questions that way. Ethan's chest tightened as he thought about Logan, abandoned, alone, and denied the life he should have shared with Caleb. He couldn't fathom the pain his son's twin must have endured. And yet, here he was, alive, wearing the necklace that tied them together. One night, as Ethan sat with Logan over dinner, he decided to broach the subject carefully. Logan, I found out some things about your past, he began, his voice steady but gentle. About where you came from. Logan froze, his fork hovering midair. What do you mean? Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the hospital bracelet marked Baby A. He placed it on the table. This was my son Caleb's. He wore it the day he was born, and according to the hospital, he wasn't born alone. He had a twin. Logan's eyes widened, his gaze shifting between Ethan and the bracelet. A twin, he whispered. Disbelief etched across his face. Ethan nodded. I think that twin might be you. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Logan's hands trembled as he touched the bracelet, his emotions a storm of confusion and anger. How is that possible? Why wouldn't I know? Because someone took you, Ethan said quietly. They separated you from your brother and hid the truth. But I'm here now, and I promise I'll help you find out everything. You deserve to know where you came from. Logan looked up, his hazel eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, the walls he had built around himself began to crack. You really think I'm your son's twin? Ethan reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Logan's. I don't just think it, Logan. I know it. As the truth began to surface, so too did the bonds of a family long divided. But there were still questions to answer and a past to uncover, a journey that would test them both in ways they could never have imagined. The revelation that Logan was Caleb's twin marked a turning point in Ethan's life. It was no longer about solving a mystery. It was about righting a profound wrong and reclaiming the family he thought he'd lost forever. But there was still so much to uncover, and the journey toward justice had only just begun. Ethan spent days with Frank Collins, piecing together the web of deceit orchestrated by the Hope Foundation. The adoption agency's records showed payments funneled through shell companies, with names of complicit hospital staff cropping up repeatedly. And at the center of it all was Dr. Robert Dawson, the now retired hospital administrator. Ethan knew confronting Dawson wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't let the man's actions go unanswered. Dawson lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the modest home Ethan and his wife had built. The injustice of it fueled his determination as he knocked on the ornate front door. When Dawson answered, his polished demeanor cracked slightly at the sight of Ethan in his police uniform. Officer Carter, Dawson said, his voice steady but guarded. To what do I owe the pleasure? We need to talk, Ethan replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. about the Hope Foundation and what happened to my son's twin. Dawson's face hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. Ethan pulled out a stack of documents, financial records, falsified birth certificates, and witness statements. He laid them on Dawson's glass coffee table. His voice sharp. You profited off tearing families apart. You falsified records, lied to grieving parents, and sold children to the highest bidder. And you thought you'd never have to answer for it. Dawson's composure faltered as he stared at the evidence. You have no proof I was involved. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and steady. This isn't just about you and me. This is about every family you destroyed, every child you robbed of their rightful life. And I will make sure you pay for it. The threat landed. Dawson's hands trembled as he reached for the documents. His voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Your confession. Ethan replied. Everything you know about the Hope Foundation. Every name. Every payment. Every lie. You tell the truth, or I'll bring this to court and let a jury decide. The weight of the years finally broke Dawson. With shaking hands, he began to write. Meanwhile, back at Ethan's house, Logan was adjusting to his new reality. He had moved in temporarily, hesitant to call it home, but relieved to have a roof over his head. Sarah, Ethan's wife, worked tirelessly to make him feel welcome, even setting up Caleb's old room for him. One evening, Logan stood in the doorway, staring at the space that had once belonged to his twin. The walls were lined with posters of baseball players, and a bookshelf held a mix of novels and trophies. It was a life frozen in time, untouched since Caleb's passing. Sarah appeared behind him, holding a fresh set of sheets. It's okay if it feels strange, she said gently. Take your time. Logan nodded, his voice soft. It's just overwhelming. I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to be part of this. Sarah set the sheets down and placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just know that we're here for you. You're not alone anymore. Logan turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude and uncertainty. Thanks, Mrs. Carter. She smiled. You can call me Sarah, or Mom, if you ever feel ready. The word Mom hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Logan nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. Maybe someday. Ethan's case against the Hope Foundation gained momentum. Dawson's confession, coupled with Frank's meticulous research, provided enough evidence to bring charges against the agency and its associates. The court proceedings were long and grueling, but each step brought a sense of closure for Ethan and the other families involved. Logan, though reluctant at first, attended several hearings. Sitting in the courtroom, he listened to testimony after testimony from parents who had lost children, from adults who had discovered they were adopted under false pretenses. It was sobering and heartbreaking, but it also gave Logan a sense of solidarity. He wasn't the only one who had been wronged, and he wasn't alone in seeking justice. During one particularly emotional hearing, Margaret Long, a former social worker, recounted her experiences with the Hope Foundation. We were told to ignore discrepancies, she said, her voice trembling, to destroy records if anyone asked too many questions. It was wrong, and I didn't have the courage to stop it then. But I'm here now, and I'm telling the truth. As Margaret stepped down from the stand, Logan caught her eye. She paused, offering him a small, tearful smile. In that moment, he realized how many people had fought for this day, not just for him, but for everyone. After months of legal battles, the court finally delivered its verdict. The Hope Foundation's leaders, including Dawson, were sentenced to decades in prison. Compensation was ordered for affected families, though no amount of money could truly repair the damage. That evening, the Carters held a quiet celebration at home. Logan sat at the dining table, surrounded by Ethan, Sarah, and a few close friends. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging. Ethan raised his glass. To Logan, he said, his voice steady with emotion. To family, and to never giving up. They clinked glasses, the sound ringing with hope and renewal. After dinner, Logan pulled Ethan aside. I've been thinking, he began hesitantly, about Caleb, about everything he missed out on because of what happened. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You don't have to carry that weight alone. Logan, Caleb would want you to live your life fully, not to dwell on the past. Logan nodded, a determined look in his eyes. I want to do something meaningful. For him. For me. Maybe help kids who went through what I did. Ethan smiled. You'll make a difference. Logan, I know you will. As the evening wound down, Logan stepped into Caleb's room. He picked up the guitar resting in the corner and began to play softly, a melody of hope and healing. The sound filled the house, a poignant reminder of the brother he never knew but felt deeply connected to. For the first time in years, the Carters' home felt whole again. And as Logan strummed the final chords, he knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter built on justice, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Thank you for watching this emotional journey of loss, discovery, and redemption on Empathy Stories. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support more meaningful content. We believe that stories like this inspire change and remind us of the enduring power of family and justice. Stay tuned for more heartfelt tales, and we'll see you in the next story. Take care.